All right, everybody, we've all had our makeup session, and we're all looking ready to be on live streaming
Yeah,
TV.
exactly.
We had Rich. Rich, you got to put your bib on.
Yeah.
Do your makeup bib.
I need,
You know.
need some more. Yeah, some makeup bib.
So we're
he's
waiting
got
for
his
Arcady.
handlers in
He's
the
gonna,
background going, touch it up, touch up the hair a little bit more. Oh.
Arcady's going to be joining here soon. So today's topic is going to be around, what is it that IT usually does not know about the business, and vice versa when we're doing these sessions. So in our last session, we talked about the cast of characters and going through the build of a data platform and what that looks like in terms of the members that are part of it. This week we're going to go into that process and what it's like to communicate to the business and to the IT. But first, I want to go into something that we released this week. We had a interesting release this week. We released something called Snow Objects this week, so snowobjects.com. And found out like literally that night that we released it that it cannot be called snow objects. It has to be called flow objects because we can't use the word snow legally because of partnership reasons with Snowflake and whatnot. But if you want to see some tools and I'll talk a little bit about them, there's some tools that we have built out there for Snowflake. These are tools that we've used over the past 6 years in our Snowflake deployments that have made it much easier. One of them is the auditing and monitoring stuff, which is very cool. Rich, you recently, don't say the client name, but you recently had a client that ran it and saw some pretty big glaring things, right?
Yeah, we're using it. I mean, we've run it at a couple of places, and it's interesting because we learn a lot when we start taking a look at how Snowflake is being used, and there's.
Well, what is it? Tell us what it is for a second.
Well, it's a tool that allows us to. I mean, there's so much metadata in Snowflake about what's going on in your Snowflake environment. Tables and sizes of tables and all of your compute usage, the credits that are being used and how things are set up and the security and the access controls and all of those types of things. And so what we're doing is gathering a bunch of that metadata, persisting that in a way that makes it easier to be able to review and look at that, and then pulling that into a tool that we can visualize what's happening and see. Where are we spending our money? Why are we getting charged this much for credits? Why is our storage certain, why are we using so much storage? How do users get access to a specific database, for example? What roles? How are roles inheriting from, up to other roles? Just being able to visualize and see what's going on with your Snowflake environment. So that's what we've got with that, and it's going to continue to grow and progress and evolve as we learn more and more.
And find out they had a whole bunch of blind
updates. This is the surprise that everybody gets with Snowflake is as we're using it, we're doing lots of things. We're adding tools to help us do data ingestion and things like that, and all of a sudden. There's surprises that happen, like, and people come that are paying the bill and say, hey, we've got all, what's all this storage? Are we really got that much data? Do we really have, half a petabyte? That seems, wow, what's going on here? And so being able to see where that storage is being used, is it being used in the actual data? Is it being used in fail-safe? Is it being used because of changes in clones, and all of a sudden when you start to be able to see that, then you can start to say, oh, well, you know what, that's costing us some money here. Do we really need this? Do we really need that? And we can kind of then make better decisions, or at least more informed ones. And the whole idea with it, Jared, is that again, it's evolving, it's progressing, but we want to be able to not only see what's going on, but also use it to see how can we use Snowflake, and how can we get better with our Snowflake implementation? Do we need to change some warehouse sizes? Do we need to, there's a bunch of things like that. There's actually some pretty cool SQL behind some of it. Glenn even wrote some of
Ooh, Glenn, that's pretty good. You know SQL.
Cool.
Oh man, I learned how to do select star.
When he threw it over the fence to me, it actually was running. Until you tried to actually point it at some data, and then I fixed it for him and gave it back to him. But it was a good start. So, there's a lot there. And
then you have the access control master, which is so interesting. I mean, and it's basically what we've been implementing at a bunch of different clients. Explaining it to people, I can explain it, but it takes me so long to explain because I have to explain the issue. And Snowflake administrators get it like that. They know it.
Well, they've felt the pain. They've lived the. I always love it. It's this conversation, something like this. Hey, we created some tables, and we can't find them. Or we try to run a query and it says we don't have rights to them, but we do have rights to them, but we can't see them. What happened to them? Or they used to be here, now they're gone. Did somebody delete them? And then there's the whole scramble, and then you always have somebody that says, "No, I see them. Why don't you see them?" And then it's a bit
all of a sudden, over a couple of months, everybody is a sysadmin because nobody can see anything.
Right.
So this is essentially we call it the access control master. I won't try to go deep into it here, but we can talk about it with everybody individually. And then we have a data loader, a simple data loader, not a CDC gizmo, and also not a SnowSQL where I can files load sequentially and it's kind of slower. It's kind of in the middle, and it allows us to load data in a parallel fashion into Snowflake. It's lightweight and it's a command line utility, which is pretty cool. So those are some of the tools, plus the Excel add-in.
Jared, with all of these tools, essentially, this is the last 6+ years of Snowflake deployments, and the focus has been, how do we not repeat ourselves? How do we build tools that help us? So the data loader, folks are used to BCP on SQL Server. They're used to fast load on Teradata, or they're used to doing this using NZLoad on the Netezza environment. And so, it gives you a chance to be able to, you like my virtual background.
Yes,
I see you
love
smiling.
It. I love it.
Yeah, nobody is in the office. Everybody's working
COVID.
from home. Yeah. And so with all of these tools, whether you look at our dashboard to look at the Snowflake environment, or you look at the data loader, essentially these are the tools we use as part of our engagements to speed up the process of onboarding a customer. So the bulk loader helps us get data off of their current environment into Snowflake, and the other tools are also critically important. But again, it's giving these tools also to our customers so that they can use them. But we also have lots of partners that have approached this where they see the tools that we use, and those will be available to the partner ecosystem as well.
The last one and then we'll get into topic is the Excel add-in. And so literally an add-in to Excel where you could click on it, log into Snowflake, and literally acquire data from Snowflake into Excel, directly into Excel.
And then be able to share that with other users who may not really understand the SQL, but need those data and need it to be refreshed and be represented.
Create formulas and all the goodies in Excel, and then make it refreshable. So anyway, I'll be releasing a video about the Excel nightmare here in about a month around that. So let's get into the topic here. So we talked about the cast of characters last week. Who are the people that we need to have a successful project? Who are the people in our way? Now I want to kind of get into the actual interview itself, what this interview is like. And specifically, I have a question written down here, which is, what is it that IT usually does not know about the business? And I know I don't want to use the word everything, because I think that is an easy answer. I want to really kind of try and get into some specifics. Is like, what is it that they don't know about the business that usually surprises them? You'd mentioned, Glenn, that they usually try to skip those meetings. So they don't think they're going to learn anything new. I mean, what is it that they're learning? Give me some examples. Same with you, Arcadia. You've done a lot of these kind of business and IT interview sessions. What is it that they don't know?
So one of the things as we go in as consultants, there's a lot we don't know about the organization that we're working with. And so part of what we're trying to do is learn the business, learn the technology that's in place, learn, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything. And so we have to ask questions. And so a lot of times as we're preparing for these and deciding who should participate in some of these, especially the business discussions, is we'll invite a member from the IT group to participate with us, and oftentimes they're like, well, we know what they're going to be talking about, so we've got we have our day job, and maybe we don't need to be there. And we always say, we'd like you to be there because I think you'll find it very informative. And so as we're asking questions about the business and having them kind of explain it to me as if I'm in the 5th grade, because that's what I have to have, is
right.
That's 5th grade explanation. And as a business user or a business leader is explaining things and going through things, there's never been a case where we haven't finished those meetings and the IT person that was attending with me says, wow, that was so informative.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Now, why does that happen? Twofold. One is everybody that works at the same company assumes that
Right.
they know what's going on. And so a lot of the details about, how the business is doing their day-to-day processes and where their pain points are, oftentimes are just assumed that everybody knows those.
Yeah.
And that's where kind of the erosion of communication oftentimes happens, is the assumption of that because you work here, and
Is that why
why
IT sometimes fears the business?
Well, I mean, let's face it, we've all worked on the IT side of things, and IT is sometimes a thankless job. Everybody wants it now, everybody wants it, and when everything works well, nobody pats you on the back. But when something doesn't work, well then, pitchforks come out and, burning at the stakes is desired. And so sometimes, there is that frustration, and or the challenge is we need some new technology, but we're being frustrated by the business because they don't think there's value in making that acquisition or that capital expenditure, and so there's always some type of sometimes contention in there. When we come in, obviously we're coming in to address, specific identified problems. Oftentimes, I often hear, as we have some of these meetings and we're kind of, following up with the IT people, they said, we've explained that to the business 1,000 times. Everything you're saying is stuff that we've said before.
that we get a lot of.
Yeah, and so
and then they'll say, well, how come they'll listen to you, but they won't listen to us? And you're saying the exact same thing we said.
Yeah, and that's just reality of organizations,
Yeah.
Well,
Arcadia, you've mentioned this fear thing a couple times to me in the past, that there's this fear that IT. Well, and we see it, like IT sometimes is really scared to have us speak to their business users. It's confusing to me, but I'm curious. You've seen a lot of this and you've talked about it, and I'm curious what your take is on it. Why?
I think as you look at across organizations, I think the role of IT has been changing quite a bit over the last 10 years, certainly. IT traditionally started in the business focused on making sure that the systems are up and running and email is there. I call that the dial tone. So we now are expecting a certain level of service. We're expecting the dial tone. I think the fear is not so much that IT is afraid. I think it's normal human nature. If you're working at a company for 5 years or even 2 years, I think your coworkers, or maybe you're sort of projecting this onto yourself, you're expecting that you should know these things. And so the fear is of walking in and asking a question, tell me how you do this. And
Yeah.
so for Glenn, Rich, and I, and others, when we come in as an outsider, it's a lot easier for us to be able to ask questions because we're not expected to know these things.
Yeah.
So the fear is really just a human element.
It's an
We don't
expectation.
want to be embarrassed. We don't want to ask something that we're sort of expected to know. But that's where systems get built, and especially analytical systems get built, that what we call a bottom up. We get a big database instead of a data warehouse.
Yeah.
And so that's really the thing that we are there to avoid. We're there to really simplify complexity. We're there to make sure that we do ask those business questions. And again, I think that's really the role that we serve. IT, the other side of it is IT for many years has been in the order taking business. So projects get spun up to deliver a particular system or particular functionality. And so we've taken the order and we've gotten really good at executing on those orders. For the world that we live in and the things that we build, because these are analytical, these are things that will answer questions that the business has. You can't approach it from what data do you have and where does that data live. You have to approach it, as we say, top down. You have to understand, if you have this question, where does it come from? So we are not afraid of asking the questions that are below the surface, because the alternatives are terrible. People deliver 110 reports and no one uses any one of them. And so again, the goal is to provide value, but the fear is normal human fear, I think.
And when I was just going to add, when we do these types of interviews, we often, here's a very typical pre-engagement conversation that will happen, is what are the questions you're going to ask? Give us a list of the questions you're going to ask.
Can you script out all your questions that you're going to ask?
We want to give them
minute in the hour you're going to ask them.
Yeah, and we want to give them to the business ahead of time so that they can be ready. And often what I tell people is it's hard to put those together because, this will date me here, if you remember the old series Columbo, the investigator, he was going in trying to discover without putting, if I give you questions to answer, somebody's going to write those up and I'm not going to learn what it is. And part of what we're looking for is, as a business, and I mentioned this last week, as a business starts to tell us what their needs are, they oftentimes don't tell us the most critical need in a way that is a game changer. Oftentimes they'll give us some other problem that is a problem, but it's really not the one. If we solved that, would be a real game changer for them. And I always know when we touch on the right thing, because the business person's eyes will light up and they'll say, whoa, if you can give me that, then I can do this. The second I hear those words, then I know that we've discovered the value that we can bring to bear for the business. And because typically these discussions start out, well, we want something to work better, and oftentimes they say, we've wanted this for a long time and blah, 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 but they really haven't gotten specific enough for us to build anything for it.
Well, and this is why the whole question, and we, of course, we can produce this list of questions that we would ask, but it's so meaningless. And the reason why, go ahead.
I'm not sure, Jared, if it's necessarily meaningless. I think what we do when those questions come up, we already have a 1 or 2 page document that basically says, these are the types of questions that we'll ask.
The problem is, it's you're going to inject probably within the first, I don't know, 3 sentences after they answer another question that says, no, wait a second. What you're saying is this. Am I getting that correct? Like, you might ask the first of this huge list of questions that we sent them. And the reality is you're not even asking the other questions. You're really going down the business problem. This is much more like a business conversation than it is some kind of like over the wall question and answer period, Yeah,
so it's true. And we've had situations where we'll sit down with somebody who has a specific area or domain that they're responsible for, and we'll start asking questions. And what they find out within the first 5 minutes is that we actually understand what it is that they're doing.
Right.
And so we can have a meaningful conversation, and rarely is it about, well, which schema does it live in and what data? Those are not the business conversations. And that's why a lot of times the thing that is being asked of us is, sort of, what do you do? What's your role? And I think the way we've summarized it many times is we literally are a bridge between business and IT. So it speaks to that fear that you asked about earlier, but it also speaks to the fact that, what we are asked to do is to deliver value to the business, and that's how these projects get judged on.
So no, I want to ask now, what is it that the business typically does not understand about the IT side? So we talked about IT on to the business, but what is it that the business is usually unaware of? And Arcadia, you and I had talked about, questions that the business should be asking IT.
Sure.
We were going to do a whole presentation around this. So if you can kind of speak to that side of it, I mean, what is it that the business isn't understanding about the technical side of this?
Well, I would say the number one most frustrating thing for IT is that when asked as to when IT approaches business and says, what would you like? The answer is, give me everything. I think that's one of the most difficult things that IT hears quite a lot.
Well, I mean, you can abdicate your responsibility at that point, right, Arcady?
Yes. Yeah, it's abdication of responsibility.
All the data, give it to them.
Yeah. But part of it comes from our process, and so a project process. We approach data projects the same way we approach projects for rolling out an email system or rolling out an ERP system. Data projects or analytic driven projects are very, very different. Your goals and what you're trying to achieve is very different. And so business and IT are used to this dance of where we put a BRD, a business requirements document. We write down exactly which fields we need to capture on a screen and what the validation rules will be. And when you roll out an ERP or a CRM system, that's expected. That's normal. The problem with the analytical side of things is that, and what the business has learned through those exercises is if they forget to include a field, or if they forget to ask for something, it turns into another 3-month or a 2-month project. And so the fear on the business side is, how do I not ask for everything because I'm afraid I'm going to miss something, and then it's a change control process. It's the fear of the change control.
Yeah.
And so I think what the other things that I think business needs to know about IT is that the conversation that usually takes place from the business to IT is about, extracts and data sets and systems. I'd like the business folks to start to think about your conversations and the way you engage with IT, the way you normally would engage with us, which is, tell us about the goals, tell us about the business, tell us about your process and how you get your job done, versus talking about, data and how do I get to the data. That should be the 1% of the conversation. 99 really should be focused on explaining your job. And there's nothing wrong with, clearly with business folks explaining to the folks on the IT side why and what their job is and why it's important.
And this is where some humility is important on the IT side to really accept the feedback, right? Like, don't assume that you know what this business is doing, because if you did, they wouldn't have the frustration.
There's a story I use a lot, and it really resounded with me when I heard it years ago. Back in the days, one of the presidents of Milwaukee, the guys that make tools, he went and was meeting with the engineers and the salespeople and whatnot about their line of drills. And they were all excited to roll out some new drills and some new technology around the drills, and they were having kind of a meeting to prepare, how they were going to roll this out. And there was a lot of discussion about, how this new thing worked, blah, blah, blah. And the president got up and he says, folks, what are we selling? And the people are selling, raising their hands, we're selling this kind of drill and they're this kind of drill. And he goes, no, we're selling holes. We sell holes, okay? All kinds of holes. and we sell holes that our holes always appear. They work. They're dependable. They're things like that. But at the end of the day, guys, we're selling holes. Remember that, because our clients don't really care that we put a brushless system in with blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
want to
yeah.
know that my hole is going to work every single time. I'm going to be able to get
And
that
it's easy
hole.
to drill.
And so sometimes this is the challenge of the technical folks coming to
Yeah.
talk to the business. They want to talk about the technology. Hey, we're using this cloud and Hadoop and clusters and blah, 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 and what the business hears is blah, 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 and they go, yeah, but I don't know that you're hearing what I'm saying. From a technological point of view, as Arkady mentioned, we need to say, tell me about your business needs. Don't worry about the technology. And in fact, when I talk to clients, I say, let's not talk technology. That's a separate discussion
And
about
they love
how
that. It's
to
like, oh my gosh, okay.
facilitate your holes. But we need to talk more about what is your business needs. How are you using it? How are you not using it? Why are you not using it? Who would use it? Let's talk about how your business flows. A lot of times I get a lot of great understanding about a business need when I ask them to say, tell me how you do business today and where time is spent that you wished you didn't have to do that. And you know, that's where all of a sudden the truth kind of comes out. It's like a cathartic lay on my couch and let's talk about, you know, growing up, and it builds that trust, but it all of a sudden really helps them start to talk about what is the real business need that we can then address.
Yeah.
And I think really the secret, sorry, Rich.
Go ahead, Arkady.
I think the secret sauce in what Glenn just said is that when we hear those pains, we understand what to do with them. I think that's the other fear, and that is, okay, if I now learn that this is what you do and this is your pain, I don't have an answer. I don't have a solution for it. And so I'm left with hearing it, but not being able to solve it. And I think that's really the big differentiator of what we do. We understand what to do with that process or with that need information and how to translate that into the technical language so that it can be delivered.
And
there's
the
all this
technical
psychology
vendors,
tied in.
oh yeah,
Yes.
and the technical vendors don't help because they come with, as we've always talked about, you know, beware the BI demo. They come with, you know, all kinds of, you know, look at this Presto Magic, and if you have our magical tool, you know, it comes with a big bag of pixie dust, and we'll sprinkle it over your organization, and magically we'll pop out what you want. And we all know that doesn't happen. That
Yeah.
Well, and you know, you got to look at this from a business perspective, right? What does the business want? They want, at the end of the day, they want IT to be able to deliver on these projects in a way that's going to solve their problems and help make things easier, right? They don't need to know all the technical details that IT loves to talk about. I'll never forget years and years ago, I flew from Northern California down to Dallas for a job interview. For 2 days, I sat in front of executive teams, and they peppered me with all these questions. I shared with them all kinds of information and things that we could do and where they needed to go. And the CFO at the end of the 2 days was driving me back to the airport, and so I could fly home. And he said, "I just have one more question for you." He said, "Can you really do all that stuff you just told us the last 2 days?" That was, you know, it was bottom line was, how do we, you know, yeah, that's great that we went into all this technical and all this details, but can you really deliver? I mean, that's really what the business is interested in. And so many times from an IT perspective, we're so, like Glenn talked about, we're all excited to talk about databases and schemas and Hadoop and all of these other things that really don't mean anything. We need to understand that we're coming from two different places, and we need to accept that, embrace that, and then understand how to have those discussions so that from a technical perspective, we can really understand what the business need is, so that we can take that expertise of all that technology, figure out how to use it to make a difference.
I could see how nervous you'd be, though, as an IT person, if you really did know the problem and you really knew what it was, but you couldn't solve it, but having the pressure to solve it. I mean, I can really relate to that.
But I think Rich touches on another really important topic, which is the marketplace is a very confusing environment in terms of identifying who do we work with? How do I evaluate who's a good partner to us? And unfortunately, a lot of times the business is not involved in choosing a partner to work with, choosing a consultancy to work with. A lot of times it's really good folks with good intentions on the IT side, but the things that are used to evaluate sometimes are the the years of Snowflake experience or the years of experience with a particular ETL tool. And frankly, while those things are important for sure, you want to make sure that you've got somebody who's experienced and capable of doing this. I think the bigger challenge is there a business fit? Can I put you in front of my executive team? Can I put you in front of my board? And those are the things to really understand from what does a successful partnership looks like? Because certainly a lot of vendor relationships instead of partnerships.
So at what point does the conversation start turning to technology? So obviously you got to have technology applied somewhere. At what point in that interview process does the technology discussion start coming into the picture? What does that look like?
I think you need to run 3 tracks. The first track is directly with IT, and you need to have the conversations with IT in terms of what the current landscape looks like, what's the roadmap, what does the exactly skill set is a big part of it, and evaluating where the gaps might be. The second track is the business track, and clearly that's the 2/3 of the equation is understanding what the business track needs to cover. But the third part of this, and again, no surprise to any of you that there's 3 things to talk about, right?
3s and 5s.
Yes, 3s and 5s. And so the third thing that's critically important is then how do you bridge those 2 together? What's the right technology? Don't start with technology, start with the problem, start with what needs to be done, and then focus on how technology solves it. I think there is a lot of shiny objects out there and a lot of really cool technologies that we get to play with, but they're not a fit for every single organization. Skills, and you talked about skills a minute ago, skills and what the organization can actually handle and how much change people can take is also critically important. It's not just, we want the shiniest thing in the world. We want to make sure that it's sustainable and people are comfortable, and there's beyond what we will deliver, we want to make sure that folks on the ground can also manage it.
Well, and that's kind of thing. Well, go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing that's also important, and sometimes this is where technology and business need and delivery times come to clash, and that is we also need to evaluate what is the maturity cycle of the business. I can bring in some really cool technology, but the business may not be ready for it. They may not be ready to work with those tools. And so bringing him in and putting him in front of the business goes, I don't know what to do with this. What am I supposed to do with this? Or what you've provided me just doesn't seem to fit with what we're trying to do. And so another big piece of that, and this is why, as Arkady talks about technology and the people and what the business needs are, really needs to come together. And why I always say, don't go buy your technology first. Because
I've frustrating when that
walked
happens.
into many organizations and says, well, we've signed a 3-year contract with XYZ technology, go make this work. And I say, okay, so what are we solving? Well, we bought this technology. Okay, thumbs up. What for? Well, because we had a really good vendor, and the sales guy took us golfing, and he's really good at that. And he told us that everybody else is using it.
Or there is a real feature in that tool set that's exciting and makes absolute sense, but just from an evolution perspective, that's not the first rock to turn over. It's not the first thing to focus on.
Yeah, good point. So they may be saying, oh, we're going to buy an MDM tool, when in reality they're not even ready for that.
Yeah, or you're not. Yeah, exactly. You're not ready for it, or hold on. It's just like anything. Some of you may see in the background some woodworking tools. I'm a big woodworker, and I can tell you that it's You learn a skill and then you get better at it, and then you want a better tool. But if you get the better tool to start with, it doesn't necessarily make your woodworking any better. And so one of the challenges that I always look at is, what is the maturity landscape of the organization, both from a technology and how they use it? You know, I see organizations that have great technology. I mean, some real cutting edge technology that's collecting dust. And you say, wow, you've invested in all this. Why aren't you using it? Well, we tried to use it and it kind of fell flat on its face. So it is part of the whole, you know, what's the magic or what's the secret sauce? A lot of it is, as Arkay said, 2/3 is always about the business. What is it that the business wants to do? You know, it's kind of like if somebody comes out of the desert and they've been without food or water for days, and they come and you prepare them a lavish meal. You know what they're going to ask for? Can I get a drink?
Water.
Can I get some water?
Yeah.
I'm not ready to sit down to steak and eggs and you know, all this. I need some water. And so oftentimes we've got the business coming begging for water, and yet we're talking about, you know, creme brulee and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And they're like, I just want water.
Well, and Glenn, you take that and kind of flip it a little bit too, and then go along with what Arcadia was saying about the shiny objects. We've got to look at this from both sides, right? I've seen many times where IT sees some cool shiny objects, and you know, that needs to be mature enough also. I mean, how many times, Glenn, have we had that discussion of, is this hardened? Is this ready for a production environment?
Is enterprise
ready? You know, so we've got to marry up from both sides. There may be some really cool shiny object, new technology, but does it really meet the needs of and solve the business you know, issues that we have? So,
and let's be honest, that happens on the business side as well. How many times have we seen you know, a whole slew of business users adopting you know, in-memory solutions that that are basically end up becoming these departmental islands that can't be scaled to the rest of the organization, and needs to be scaled to the rest of the organization.
You know, and we always hear the battle of IT versus shadow IT. You know, oh, we're so tired of the business coming up with their own stuff, rogue attempts to solve their own problems, servers under the desk, and we can't take them away. And and we're tired of them having problems with those, but yet they won't relinquish them and give them back to us.
Well, and now, I mean, things have changed so much. You know, not that technology is always the answer, but we certainly have seen a pretty big change when it comes to the technology landscape just in the last 5 years. I mean, Snowflake itself has changed a lot of how we even think about the drudgery of putting together a data landscape, and even just the conversations. I mean, just think, you know, it was pretty common 5 years ago that you were sort of forced into this hardware conversation. How much hardware do you have to have? And so you'd start these projects, and how I mean, you'd have to be dead on the hardware specs.
Yeah, the capital expenditure on hardware and trying to refine that down to exact and get it into a budget cycle, and the fear of, you know, making it too big or too small, and the horror story. I can tell you so many horror stories about, you know, being pigeonholed in a piece of, you know, physical hardware that either is too small or too big or too, you know, all of those things.
Yeah, so that we would go through maybe 3 to 4 sprints, 2-week sprints, planning out dev, test, QA, prod, and the agony that we would go through, how to size it, and how much we can afford, and how much storage we can get, and how do we virtualize. Again, I think the cloud certainly has changed things, but it's this elasticity idea that has dramatically changed things for us as well.
We just, the number of conversations we don't have to have anymore is significant. So these strategies are a lot more cogent. And then when it comes to putting together the vision of what their future technology landscape will look like, you know, one of the things is the what we call the LSA, which is this logical solution architecture. I mean, when you guys are putting that stuff together, is it just us coming up with, you know, a reference architecture, you know, the old versus the new? You know, I'm sure it's you know, what's the process we're going through there? Is it sort of boiling down all of the business requirements and then, having sessions with the IT teams?
It's a combination of a bunch of things, and I always go back to the analogy of building a house. Okay.
Yeah.
When somebody comes, if you were to go to an architect and you were going to build your dream home, and if you walked into the architect and said, "I want a house," he'd say, "Great, thank you for coming and doing business with us. Well, what kind of house do you want?" "No, I want a house." "Is it a big house or a little house?" Now, what ends up happening though is a lot of the niceties of your house, what kind of door do I have and what kind of lighting do I have and the carpets on the floor and the colors and a lot of that are very important to enjoying your house. But a bigger piece of the stability of your house deals in the foundation. And so a lot of times what we're looking at is, okay, you want to build a wonderful house and you want it to be, X color of walls and this type of carpets. But we also have to make sure that we have a foundation that as you grow your house, we're not crippled. We're not, we're not building on rough dirt and there's, going to have drainage problems and things like that. So the logical solution architecture, a lot of the basis of that is foundational. What does the foundation look like so that we can meet the needs as you both scale up and scale out? I always talk about Snowflake as a data estate, but also as you mature. So you're going to go through a natural maturity cycle with your business as they're able to start to get better information. Then they're going to want more. It's the natural effect. Oh, now that we've got this and we've got a glass of water, well, then now I am ready for that steak. Okay. We want to make sure that this is when we plan the foundation of it. I don't want to plan it so that it's just this big, knowing that I know that you're going to ask for this later on, but I don't want to necessarily go out and build this huge thing when you just want a drink of water. So a lot of times the foundational piece is critical to think both for now and the future, and making sure, and this is why the cloud is so wonderful, is before we had to kind of pigeonhole you into a physical architecture that, if you liked it or not, that's what you had. With things like Snowflake, now I can start to say, here's this architecture that can expand with you, and we've designed it in such a way that the critical pieces that oftentimes get overlooked aren't your problems expanding.
What's the most common overlooked stuff? I mean, what is it that people mostly miss?
Security, and then security is probably the biggest things. Access control and security, and how does that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, is it security or is it access control?
So both. I think the other side of this is, where does security live? So it's not just about security and access control, but where does it live? And today, most of the deployments that we see, it's the BI layer that's doing a lot of the security heavy lifting. And so you've got Cognos, MicroStrategy, Business Objects, and we've baked in all of that security tightly coupled to that, because that's where the front door was. And so it's really difficult as folks want to go to Power BI or want to go to Looker or ThoughtSpot. It's difficult for them because they've got security that is different in those particular layers. I think the other, just to go with the analogy, Glenn, of the house analogy, it's also thinking about how to lay out that house. It's thinking about, the example that I've always used when we talk about a house analogy is, you want to put your garage somewhere close to the kitchen. Why? Well, because you bring the groceries in, it's probably through the garage, and you want to have them a little bit closer. So that entire flow that is part of your design that you sit down and go through with the architect, I think that's the other important piece that needs to be part of the conversation.
And I would just add to that, the standard consistency of things. So if every door in your house looks different and every doorknob looks different and everything's different, then your house is going to kind of look, somebody's going to come visit your house and they're like, did you go to a garage sale to furnish your house? I mean, everything is different. Maybe that's what you want. But
this would map to your naming conventions and things like that.
This is naming conventions, standardizing how we're going to do things, laying in governance that keeps us from, because one of the things about technologists is we tend to invent on the fly, okay? We design on the fly all the time. So I'm sitting down and I'm about to name a table or a schema, and all of us has done this. What do we call this? And so we go, let's think, what do we want to call it? And so everybody's mindset may be different. I've found myself many times sitting down, and if I don't already have kind of a defined, consistent naming convention, it'll be different depending on what time of day you ask me what I'm going to name it. When we start to put some of that governance in place, and I know most technologists go, governance, it's like the awful thing that I hate. It's like handcuffs. I would always say governance done right is your best friend. Governance done wrong is handcuffs. Handcuff my right hand to my ankle and say, go run. But governance done right is a lot about taking just a minute or taking some time to thoughtfully think about how do we want to do things so that they're very consistent, so that the other people in our organization or people that may come after me, it doesn't look like a hodgepodge. There's consistency. There's thoughtfulness around how we designed things.
Give me a sense. I'll let Rich talk, but I want to put this question out there, so don't lose your thought, Rich. I want you to go down the rabbit hole a little bit of what specifically happens in a cloud data warehouse or a cloud data platform when that kind of governance is not present, and because it's tremendously common right now. It's all over the place. I mean, it's literally everywhere. So, Rich, you give us your comment, and then I want to ask that question.
It's interesting because people look at this and governance and what does that give me? What does that do for us? How does that enable us to? And really, when it's done the way Glenn talks about, when it's done correctly, it actually gives you freedom to be able to be much more productive, to be very consistent. It gives you freedom to have much greater control over the maintainability as you move forward. And it's one of those things where there's this real confusion where people look at this as something that's restrictive, like Glenn said, the handcuffs holding us back, when it's exactly the opposite. I mean, the example that I use when I share this with people is the little kid that it's a really windy day and he wants to go out and fly a kite with his dad. And so his dad takes him out and they let some string out and the kite's up there in the air and the kid's like, this is great. I want it to go higher. So let out some more string. And so the dad lets out some more string. The kite gets a little bit higher. And they keep going through this process. And eventually they're holding on to the very end of that piece of string. And the little kid then tells the dad, he says, okay, Dad, let go of that string so that kite can go higher. And the dad then explains to the kid, if I let go of this string, that kite's going to fall to the ground. That string is actually what's allowing that kite to reach its highest potential. And it's the same thing with these types of things. If you do it right, those are the things that enable you to be able to get success, right? That's what it's a huge. You've got to understand that, and it's a difficult thing for many people to understand.
And there's literally nothing stopping a platform like a Snowflake to just get completely out of control because it's an unlimited data platform.
Think of a really organized city versus a shanty town. Yeah. Okay. The shanty town says everybody gets to decide where streets go, how things are built. Everybody is, where we put this, where we put that, and it's a mess, right? If you've ever gone into, favela, if you want to use that term,
in Brazil,
in Brazil,
there it is.
Everything is there's no rhyme or reason to why things are. Then you go to a city that has from the
Milton
ground
Keynes
up
in the UK.
Yeah.
As an example, greatest number of roundabouts, but everything is, it's all, it's a grid.
It's a grid. And so you look at cities that were pre-planned, where somebody sat down and said, okay, before we start building, we're going to run the roads, in a grid fashion. We're going to say that they're all this big. We're going to say that, that all the sewage runs on this side and this, all these planning goes in place. Then those cities are able to grow and grow and grow, and we don't have congestion.
But get specific into Snowflake and where can it go really sideways?
Think about it. In Snowflake, you're creating structure. One of the biggest things around Snowflake is you've got structure, and as you start to bring in all your data sets from your organization, if that structure is not predefined, if we don't say, hey, here's how we're going to organize, here's how we're going to manage development life cycle, this is how we're going to name things. This is how we're going to use the right roles to manage ownership of objects and access of objects and how that works. And this is what we're going to call it. And here's why we call it that way. And oh, by the way, we're naming it in such a way so that programmatically we can take advantage of managing it and maturing it and scaling it. If we don't do any of that and we just jump in and we just start creating stuff, then all of a sudden, as Rich says, the freedom to really scale it, to grow it out to what it should be, can't be done. Because, Group A decided to call things this way and organize it this way. Group B decided to do it this way. And Group C is off on some other complete tangent. And so then we're trying to herd the cat. And we're herding cats.
And security is where this is glaring. So if you don't think about enterprise security and how to manage it properly, that's the place that becomes a really difficult place to a difficult piece to unwind. Security has to be planned up front.
The problem with the word security in the business realm, I'll just tell you guys, just my interpretation of it, is that people think of security as the hackers in hoodies. Okay.
No.
It's not, and I know you guys aren't talking about it that way, but people interpret it that way. It's the access control, it's the capacity to segment objects within your organization, so you don't just have this huge pile of objects that belong to everybody and nobody knows what they're doing, and it's just total chaos. The security is the mechanism for organizing groups and helping them know where they belong in the chaos.
And applying those rules. So example would be, I may have some data that is sensitive. It may be ITAR data. And if I am in New York, I'm able to see the data. But if I travel abroad, even though it's still me, I may no longer be allowed to see this data. It's also PII and PCI type data, or maybe even HIPAA type data. So it's not just who can see what, it's also keeping track of who saw what, so that you're able to be in compliance with those kinds of things.
The other thing around security and access control is we don't want it to be a barrier to the consumption. So if you have all these constraints for you to use your data and it's problematic and it requires quite a bit of training, guess what? You won't use it.
Yeah.
And so this is where thoughtfulness around how this comes together, it should be transparent to the user, but it should be secure. So if you walk into a big building, okay, that's well designed, you're able to get to where you need to go very efficiently. Okay, if you walked into a building that's poorly designed, then you're walking down hallways and you don't know where to turn. It's like a comparison. I'll compare it like this: New York subway, okay, versus the British or the London subway. The New York subway was meant for the people that live in New York, not for any tourists. Because I worked in Manhattan for years, and I always used to say this subway is not tourist friendly at all. Because you get in there and it's like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and you don't know where it is. If you go to London, and I've always just marveled at how well the London metro is managed. You could have never ridden a metro before. But when you walk in, it explains how you can go anywhere in the London metropolitan area with ease. Where in New York, you're like,
I'm not sure, Glenn, because New York, it's pretty simple. You just need to know what color and is it local or express and what time of day.
You need to know what uptown and downtown mean, by the way. And uptown and downtown are not an obvious term for non-New Yorkers. They think about downtown as, it's in the city. They don't think of it as an actual south.
Downtown's where the big buildings are.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so and when you do open up a Snowflake environment that does have just sort of this disorder, is the client telling you that the disorder is bad, or can you just see it when you open up the console?
A little bit of both. A lot of times clients are getting frustrated, especially around access control.
Yeah.
They one of the things as we kind of get into the cloud, and especially now where data is becoming so valuable to an organization, and this drives different types of data uses. Back even 10 years ago, data usage outside of its core application was pretty much relegated to a BI platform, right? You either used it in the application or you used it in reporting tools that were very, really geared a lot around, business focused things. Now that we're bringing data, and we now for the first time can bring data, all different types of data together, and we're starting to use many different types of tools. It's not just a BI tool. We may be using ML tools. We may be having, different tools for different needs. We may be hooking into other applications and feeding data back and forth. And so this is where, again, we talk about access control to ad nauseum, but the reason for that is if all my data is here, then where I want security to live and access control to live is here, not at the fringes. Because what opens ourselves up to the problem is that all of a sudden I bring in this new tool, and do I know what that security model needs to be applied to that tool? And can that tool adopt to my security model to begin with? And a lot of times they can't.
I think the other big challenge, Jared, is it's a lot of times it's not about naming convention or disorder that was created, whether it be security related or the way the tables and schemas are created. It's the fact that if this repository is there to serve analytical needs, a lot of times we see quite a bit of complexity because, it's a reflection of what the source system looked like. And so if the source system has 10,000 tables, you're going to find that inside of Snowflake. Right. And so the idea somehow is that modeling and data modeling is all EFCOD third normal form, and we're going to create all of these large repositories. The whole idea around simplifying complexity in that space and doing things from an architecture perspective, doing them right, is that you are modeling that data, you're curating that data so that the consumption can be made easier. And so we've made statements sometimes that people look at and get quite upset with us about. If you have more than a certain number of tables, we say you probably don't have a data warehouse. You have something else. And so that's the part that a lot of times is missing, because modeling is an overloaded term. And so folks don't necessarily, modeling relationally for OLTP is a little bit different than what we would do if we're doing modeling for
it's so different
for consumption.
If you're hiring someone that's an OLTP guy to do a data warehouse model, buckle up. It's not going to be the reality.
And there's a fit for that. I mean, there's certainly when you're capturing data off the screen and when you're optimizing for the right, absolutely the appropriate modeling approach. But again, the word modeling and what it means is sometimes completely misunderstood. And so
it's important for
standards, but those standards don't help you in getting to the final answer.
And just to speak to some of the folks that might not be hyper technical on the modeling side, because this stuff goes on YouTube. So on the modeling side, you need to think of your data and it's all of its tables, and that comes in a form or a model, and that model needs to be adapted in order to turn the data ultimately into something that's informational. And it's literally a schema. It's a structure that you are going to impose on the data so that it can be consumed as information.
Right. So Glenn used the example of the London Underground, and we talked about the New York subway. If you look at the New York subway map, it's a work of art, and I'm sure it's received awards and it's been recognized.
Arcadie's defending New York here because he lives there.
I am defending New York, absolutely.
It's a work of art.
It is a work of art, and when you look at it, it's beautiful and clean and really is simple to consume. So let's stay with the London Underground. It's easy to consume. Whereas reality, the physical world of what's underground is much, much more complicated. There are switches, there are substations, there's lots of things going on underground to manage water and to manage electricity and to manage cooling and heating and all those activities. But the map does not illustrate that. The map basically shows you this is where you start, this is where you end. And so modeling is about elevating that to a level of art, much like you'd see in a map. So the folks that you see on this screen, Glenn and Rich, artists, that's what we are.
All right, folks, that wraps up another Data Shark session. Don't forget to check us out on YouTube and some of the YouTube videos that we've got. There's Rich with his subway stations.
MTA.
And don't forget to check out Snow Objects, soon to become Flow Objects, as we talked about earlier. Thanks, everybody. We'll catch y'all later.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Have an excellent day.
Bye.